So you guys know I'm a big fan of retro vintage horror movies, but this year I decided I wanted to do a little bit better job than I have the past couple of years keeping up with the brand new horror movies. And I realized I've now watched 10 2024 horror films, so I decided let's talk about my top 10 horror movies of 2024 so far. Yeah, I know only seeing 10 is not a great way to do 10, but hey, it's just a vehicle to talk about movies. So I'm going to review all these and rank them from my least favorite to my favorite. My name is Daniel with the Cobwebs channel, and let's talk about my number 10, which is Infested. This is a French movie about residents of an apartment complex, specifically this one guy who collects rare species of insects and arachnids, who brings a rare species of spider back home to his apartment, and that spider turns out to be some kind of super spider.
Genetically designed super spiders.
That multiplies incredibly quickly. As it multiplies, the babies get bigger and bigger, and soon their entire apartment complex is infested with spiders, and they've got to somehow get out. So none of the movies I'm going to talk about on this list are bad, but this is definitely my least favorite, the one that I don't really care for that much. First of all, it's the characters. I was not into the characters in this movie. I was thinking watching this about how when you watch an 80s horror movie, now the characters may be bland, vapid, not terribly interesting, but they're usually fun. There's usually something fun going on with them. Maybe they're going out to party. There's one who's cracking jokes. Maybe a couple is sneaking off to a nearby bedroom in the house. And it's just like good vibes, you know? The characters in this movie are very dreary and they're very realistic in a way that I thought was kind of boring. Like I felt like they needed a little bit more pop, some flash, but they were just very flat and dreary and kind of depressing to spend time with. I was not a big fan of them, and the main character is just making terrible decisions, and really the entire thing, the entire events in this movie is his fault. Now, when it comes to spider horror, now I hate spiders. I absolutely hate them. I'm not like petrified of them that I can't go near them. Like I will kill the spider, get it out of my house, absolutely. But they majorly creep me out. I saw arachnophobia when I was a teenager. It was actually in a science class in high school. I remember it was my chemistry class, and that movie absolutely freaked me out, and I still love that movie. And I'm not sure what it is with this movie, but this movie did not freak me out at all, did not affect me. I wasn't even really grossed out. I don't know why the spider horror just did not click with me. Maybe it's because I didn't click with the characters. I'm not totally sure. This one is currently streaming on Shudder. But let's go ahead and talk about my number 9, which is Night Swim. Pretty simple premise to this movie. It's about a family who moves into a house that's got a pool in the backyard, and it turns out that pool is haunted. Dumb idea? Maybe, but it is simple and straightforward. This movie I heard was so terrible. I just heard awful things about this movie for so long. I definitely did not go to see it in the theater, but I had one friend who really liked it, and he was the reason that I decided to check this movie out when it hit streaming on Peacock, and I didn't think this movie was that bad. In fact, I kind of liked it, and the reason for that is I liked the characters. I actually really like this family that moves into this house, particularly the parents. Now, the dad is played by Wyatt Russell, who is Kurt Russell's son, and I'm growing to quite like him as an actor, and this movie was another notch in the belt of him doing a darn good job. And he's playing a professional baseball player who now has, I believe, MS. He's now got this disease that's holding him back, that's now just keeping him from the life that he wants to live. And his wife is very much just trying to help him, trying to keep the family together. She's played by Carrie Condon, who was just recently nominated for an Oscar for The Banshees of Inisherin. And they were both great in this movie. I really was invested in their story. One interesting thing about the pool is it actually starts to heal Wyatt Russell. So he loves this pool, all while the kids are starting to figure out that it's actually haunted. As far as the horror in the film, it's fine. It's mediocre. It's gateway horror kind of stuff. There's actually some fairly creepy images of the ghosts. You do get to see some ghostly apparitions in this movie. Sometimes the atmosphere of the pool at night is actually not bad. The ending isn't that great. My take on it is this is mediocre gateway horror for mainstream audiences from Blumhouse, but with characters I quite liked, so I was overall positive on the movie. Night Swim is currently streaming on Peacock, and you can also pick it up on Blu-ray. At number 8, Destroy All Neighbors. This is a wild indie film about a rock musician and his girlfriend who live in this apartment complex, and this new neighbor moves in named Vlad, who is this wild, somehow Eastern European big guy who's just making our main character's life absolute hell. And our main character accidentally kills him. That's not a spoiler. It happens very early in the movie. It's in the Shudder description. And from there, it's a movie about a main character losing his mind. And you don't really know if the insane things that happen in this movie are truly happening, if there's actually these people that he's accidentally murdering and then coming back from the dead, which is just the kind of thing that happens over and over in this movie, or if he's just going crazy. Now, I'm not always the biggest fan of that kind of storyline, but overall I thought this movie worked pretty well. It is a practical effects showcase first and foremost, and it is packed, which is wild, crazy practical effects that are really fun, really enjoyable to watch. And this bad neighbor, Vlad, is actually played by Alex Winter. Yes, Alex Winter from Bill and Ted, from The Lost Boys. And I, at first, wasn't totally sold on him in this movie, especially when he's just playing the neighbor, because he's so buried in makeup in this film that he kind of looked like a puppet more than an actor giving a performance, just so unrecognizable. Once he dies and becomes like this monster that comes back from the dead, it worked a little better for me, just him looking like a practical effect. But I watched a really good interview with the writer of the film that the Rad Pack podcast did, who I consider friends of the show, and it was a really good interview, and it gave me more respect for this movie, just how hard it was to actually make it. And the reason Alex Winter wanted to do it is because he loves this kind of character actor work. He loves practical effects and makeup. So I'm happy for him that he got to do this, even though I kind of feel like I would have rather just gotten a weird looking character actor to do it, just for a little bit more authenticity. But I understand why they want it to be makeup, especially when what happens in the movie happens a little bit later. The first half is just wild, crazy zaniness. The second half, I think, gets a little bit more sincere. You get into the emotion of the characters a little bit better, and I thought this movie was funny and just a good time. Destroy All Neighbors is currently streaming on Shudder. At number 7, The First Omen. So this is, of course, a prequel to the classic horror film from the 1970s, The Omen, which is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, top 5 of the 70s, I would say. And the basic hook of the movie is this is where you get to see how Damien was actually born before he actually went to the parents in the original Omen. Now, I don't tend to be a big fan of horror prequels, and this movie kind of continues that trend of the reasons for that, but the movie's undoubtedly good. It is very well made. I kind of felt like it was very much taking the style of A24, but much more specifically Robert Eggers, and just kind of putting it onto the Omen franchise. A lot about it felt a lot like Robert Eggers' The Witch, so it's kind of interesting to see that just put onto a franchise, but it is undoubtedly creepy, and it's got some images in the movie that are just burn into your brain kind of stuff. There is one image in the film that I was shocked is actually allowed in like a mainstream in theaters R-rated movie. It's kind of that hardcore. Never seen anything like it in a mainstream film before, in any movie before. So I was very impressed by that. The main performance from Nell Tiger Free is fantastic. She's great in the film. It just looks great, and it's probably the creepiest movie on this entire list. But it is a horror prequel, and because of that, you know exactly what's going to happen by the end of the movie. And I think the film doesn't make good use of that situation because it frames almost the entire plot around a mystery. And it's characters investigating, trying to find the answer that we already know, that is incredibly obvious. So a lot of the plot was difficult for me to really get like really intense and invested in. And the movie creates a reason for why people are trying to facilitate the birth of the Antichrist and try to protect him. And I thought the reason they came up with was just a little overwritten, a little bit trying too hard to do something different, when in the original The Omen, I think it just worked because, hey, Satanists, people that worship Satan, simple enough. And I think this movie just tried to overcomplicate it, which I wasn't a big fan of. The First Omen might still be in theaters, but it's yet to hit digital or Blu-ray, so you might have to wait on this one. But at number 6, let's talk about Stopmotion. Motion. This is a film about a woman who is a stop motion animator, but also the daughter of an incredibly famous and successful stop motion animator. So she's very much in her mother's shadow. But now that her mother is in the hospital, she is trying to make her own film. And the creation of this film kind of sends her more and more down this rabbit hole of madness with her stop motion creations. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a couple of indie horror films that came out a couple of years ago called Censor and A Wounded Fawn. This movie reminded me a lot of those. It's definitely another movie about a character losing their mind and you not really knowing what's real and what's not. But the thing that worked for me so well about this movie is the stop motion creations. They are incredible, incredibly grotesque. And this movie just keeps creating more and more sick and twisted ways that she actually gets materials to create these creations. And the horrific stop motion film that she's making within this film is incredibly creepy. So all the stop motion stuff is so effective. And there is a gore scene in this movie, a moment of gore that I felt like almost gave me a heart attack. Like, with the risk of sounding dramatic, it is so messed up and disturbing. Like, I couldn't watch it without just, like basically through my fingers. And you just got to give big props when a horror movie is able to do that to a person like myself who's just seen a lot, right? It's undoubtedly a good movie. Now, is it a little bit cliche in that it's another movie about a character losing their mind? I feel like there's a lot of movies like that right now. Yeah, kind of is. And I didn't super love the ending. This is going to sound too much like a criticism of they should have ended it the way I wanted them to end it. And I don't mean it to come across that way, but I just thought there was such an obvious way to end this movie that would have been just so dark and interesting. And I felt like they went with the most obvious, most kind of boring way that they could have ended this movie. And
it's a bit boring.
That did kind of disappoint me, but it doesn't change the fact that this is a darn effective, really messed up horror movie. I absolutely recommend it. Stop Motion is now available for digital, rental, or purchase, but it's going to be on Shudder on May 31st. At number 5, we've got Lisa Frankenstein. So this movie takes place in the 1980s, and it's about a teenage girl named Lisa who is a little bit dark, a little bit macabre, and at the night of a thunderstorm, a dead body is risen from the grave by lightning and comes to visit her because she regularly visited his grave. Now, Catherine Newton plays this lead girl, and I thought she was fantastic in this movie. Now, I've been a big fan of her for quite a while. I originally saw her in a comedy called Blockers, and then I really liked her in Freaky, and a horror comedy that came out a couple of years ago. And this movie's written by Diablo Cody, who wrote stuff like Juno and Jennifer's Body. And I think of all of the actresses that have had to handle Diablo Cody dialogue, which is, as a lot of people know, is fairly stylized, some might say overwritten, Catherine Newton is the best actor for handling that dialogue. I thought nobody has come across more naturalistic and just more believable while delivering that hyper stylized dialogue. So I thought she was just a showstopper in this movie. Just loved her in the film. Cole Sprouse plays the zombie, and he's very likable. Now, I went into this movie expecting that it was going to be a kind of spooky teen rom-com, essentially. And it is that, but it's way darker and way more macabre, just like viciously macabre at times, than I was expecting. And I really appreciated that. This movie goes for it in the way that a lot of movies of its ilk would definitely not dare. So I really respected that. The 80s setting just felt very authentic, has the opportunity for just a lot of great music and a lot of great nostalgic visuals that I really enjoyed. It has a lot of fun side characters as well, some of which are stereotypes in a dramatic, fun way, some of which subvert stereotypes in an interesting way. Lisa Frankenstein is just an incredible amount of fun. It's now streaming on Peacock, and you can also pick it up on Blu-ray. At number 4, we've got Lowlifes. Now, this is a movie about a family on a road trip vacation that end up in a rural area and maybe take a wrong turn, meet a hillbilly family, and things take a turn for the worse. Now, this is a Tubi original horror movie, and I gotta be upfront real quick that I'm actually friends with one of the co-directors of this film, Mitch Oliver. For years, he was the host of a horror podcast called The Terror Table, and I've guested on that show many times. We podcast together on my various podcasts many times as well. So we're just good buddies, and he's a fantastic guy. So I just have to acknowledge that. But I do think I can recognize if a friend has done something well or hasn't. And I think this movie was an incredible amount of fun. Now, when I describe the premise of the movie, I realize it sounds very cliche, but there's actually a dramatic twist that happens like at the end of the first act or so that really turns this premise on its head and does something very original with it. Now, the characters are so much fun to watch in this movie, both because you like some of them, because you hate some of them, but they're still really fun to watch. It's got a bit of a Texas Chainsaw energy. You might even say a Texas Chainsaw 2 energy in terms of just the manic, wacky, zany characters that you get to watch in this movie. I thought the actors just did a great job at that. It's got great gore, great practical effects, and it's just consistently interesting, surprising. It'll make you laugh. It'll gross you out at times. I mean, this movie just kind of had it all for me. Now, up to this point in the list, the ranking for me has been crystal clear. Like, anybody can disagree or agree with me as much as you want, but for me, this is the only way it could have gone. But my top 3 are basically tied. Like, I'll be honest with you, my top 3 are basically all my number 1. It was really hard to rank these, but I had to do it somehow. So, by the way, as long as I'm paused right now, give a like on this video. That would be cool. But let's jump in with my number 3, which is Late Night with the Devil. So this movie positions itself as a lost episode of a late night talk show in the 1970s. It stars David Stopmotion as Jack Delroy, who is trying so hard to stop his show from getting canceled. So on Halloween night, he says that he's going to do an interview with the devil. Now, I loved this movie, and the atmosphere of it alone was almost enough to get it higher on this list, because of the Halloween 1970s late night talk show, just really cozy feel. I just know I'm gonna watch this like practically every Halloween season to come. This movie was just such a great and enjoyable world for me to live in. And also, this is one of the only 2 movies on the list, along with the first Omen, that I found scary at all. I thought this movie's take on demon possession was so good. Now, how Jack Delroy is going to interview the devil live on television is he's bringing on a girl who is supposedly possessed by a demon. And this young actress who plays this girl was excellent. I thought she was so effectively creepy. And this movie has a unique take on demon possession, which is normally not one of my favorite subgenres. But this movie's take on it is the demon is always inside of her, but it is not taking control of her all the time, like in The Exorcist, where a lot of times she's able to go about living her life, but every now and then the demon will just wiggle into her mind and take over, and when it's done, it will wiggle out, and then she's herself again. And just the idea of this girl just living with this demon in her on a day-to-day basis was so creepy to me. Like, I thought that's one of the best ideas in any of these movies that we've talked about. But of my 3 number 1s, basically, I put this one at the bottom because the ending didn't totally stick the landing for me. It does betray its central conceit of being an actual episode of a late night talk show at the end, where it becomes more of an actual normal movie, but although a bit surreal for sure. And I wish it had stuck more to the, basically found footage kind of premise, but it does end with a final shot that's definitely impactful. At number 2, we've got Abigail. So this is a movie about a bunch of criminals who are hired to kidnap the daughter of a mysterious, very rich man and hold her for ransom. When they bring her to the hideout spot to hold her until they get the money, they find out that she is a vampire and the whole thing is a trap. She's just gonna drink through them and play with her food. I feel like I keep calling movies so much fun because there's just been a lot of fun movies this year, but man, this movie is an incredible amount of fun. Now, I love vampire movies and I love this cast. I mean, this cast almost seems assembled just for me. I love Melissa Barrera from the last 2 Scream movies and from In the Heights, which is a fantastic musical that I think is very underrated. Dan Stevens from The Guest, and lots of fun stuff. And I think he's never been better in a movie since The Guest than he is in this movie. Just as this slimy criminal who's smarter than most of the rest of them. I thought he was so great. And it's also got Catherine Newton from Lisa Frankenstein. Just got a lot of actors that I'm a huge fan of. But how it delivers as a vampire movie is just so satisfying. I mean, this vampire girl is awesome. And I wasn't sure how much I would like a vampire movie that's just about, a 12-year-old girl vampire. Cause I like Dracula. I like Jerry Dandridge, Catherine Deneuve in The Hunger, and just a 12-year-old girl. I wasn't sure how good that would be, but she is fantastic in the movie. A vicious, incredibly violent vampire. This movie has just so much blood and gore, but always in a fun way, never in a disturbing way, which is something I think the Radio Silence guys are very good at. They made this movie as well as Ready or Not, and the last two Scream movies as well. It's just got so much practical effects. If there was any CGI in the movie, I couldn't tell. I also couldn't tell from the lot of cast interviews I watched leading up to my review of this movie that I put out on the channel, where they just talked about the blood cannons they used, for example. Just a lot of practical effects. At number 1, we've got Immaculate. So this stars Sydney Sweeney as Sister Cecilia, who is a young woman who transfers to a convent in Italy where she's going to take her vows as a nun. There she discovers that even though she's been a virgin her entire life, she is now pregnant. And this is very quickly accepted by all the priests and nuns around her as a miracle from God, as an immaculate conception. And she's quickly treated as like the second coming of the Mother Mary. Now, of all these movies, this is the most recent one that I watched. I actually just watched it, and man, I loved this movie. It's very similar to the first Omen. This one actually came out first. I don't know which one was written first, but this one got released first, much to its advantage. But both movies about nuns and a pregnancy that's probably supernatural, religious horror films. I think they both take place in Italy, by the way, as well. A lot of similarities, but I like this one so much more because it doesn't pretend to be a mystery we already know the answer to. This movie, we're very much along for the ride with Sydney Sweeney, who I thought gave a great performance in the movie. I mean, this character, Sister Cecilia, is probably maybe my favorite character in a movie so far this year. Like, I thought she was so sympathetic. I was so much along the ride for her. She's proactive in a way that you want your hero of the movie to be. And by the end of the movie, gosh, you're just rooting for her so hard, wanting her to succeed against the villains of the movie, who I won't give away. And her performance in the final shot is like incredible. It's like her Mia Goth in Pearl kind of a moment. And I loved following her through this movie and trying to figure out what is going on. And this movie really kept me in suspense of what was happening. You go into the movie expecting, you basically know, like you've seen Rosemary's Baby, right? But the movie definitely has some tricks up its sleeve, kept me guessing, does not arrive at the most obvious answer. And the twist by the end of what's really happening was wild, unexpected, possibly offensive to some people, but I respected how hard it went for it. It's got fantastic moments of grisly violence peppered in, which are well contrasted with how classy most of the rest of the movie is. And when these just moments of insane horror hit, I mean, they really do hit. I also really like the music. This is one of the only movies on the list where like the score really stood out to me. I thought it was excellent. I loved this movie. I'm already excited to watch it again, to experience the wild twist, the violence, the great lead performance all over again. Immaculate is my favorite movie so far of 2024. So that's my list, but I want to know yours. What are your favorite horror movies of 2024 so far? And if you want to watch more videos on this channel, check out this video right over here. Top 10 80s slasher movies you might not have seen. It's actually a volume 2. And you can check out this playlist right down here for my 2024 horror movie reviews so far. Thank you so much for watching. Give a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.